So I remember growing up, my cousins and my siblings and I would go up north to my grandparents' cottage up in Crivets, and I remember we would pull out the little drawer with all the little VHS tapes with all the like the Disney movies or like the old Christmas movies that we would all watch. And I always think about the themes that were in those Disney movies and everything, like, following your dreams. And like, I remember like Tangled and how she wanted to see like all, the lanterns and everything like that. And so my first question for you guys that I would like you guys to discuss among your tables is, what is your favorite Disney movie, and what was the theme of it? And that's the question. So you can take, 5 minutes to conversate about that. And this is something that, it's kind of hard for us. It's almost like a paradox where in order for us to gain more, we must lose. In order for us to receive, we must give. And I know a lot of times when, like, I remember going through college and everything, we have like study abroad, and it costs I think it's $5,000 for just like a month to go somewhere in the country and learn and everything. Or I'll hear like coming out of high school, like, go travel, go do this, and go, go many places. Or, it can be that way for like materialistic kinds of things, like clothing, cars, or, jewelry, or and things like that. And I think how the more freedom we have, we are able to have that by the obedience and by us giving our will to God. It says in the Lord's Prayer, let your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. When we focus on what we ought to do and not so much on what we want to do, life can become a lot more clear, and it can be a lot more fruitful. C.S. Lewis wrote beautifully, who is more freely to play piano, the child who bangs on it to its heart's whim and desire, or is it the student disciplined in its practice, obedient to his teacher and master of the law of music theory? It's in our obedience to God, letting him take the reins of our lives, when we choose to give up our own will and let him guide us. There's a reason why they have an instruction manual when we're putting stuff together from IKEA. Sometimes we can't understand the words, but the drawings do a pretty good job sometimes. Sometimes when we don't use the instructions, we get something that we didn't pay for. So we have to take it all apart and then actually look at the instructions, and it looks like a chair that we actually bought, not some coffee table. It's life is going to be a lot clearer. Life is going to be a lot more fruitful when we listen to the person who created us, who created everything. And he has a plan for us. Sometimes we just got to listen. I heard on the mission trip a lot, we plan, God laughs, and it's almost ironic because I'm a person myself who I love planning. I love preparing for the future. I don't like getting into situations that I don't know what I'm supposed to do, because I don't like twiddling my thumbs. And I know some of you who were on the mission trip, I was always looking for the next thing to do, and I didn't like waiting, but sometimes that's what we're called to do. We're called to take a moment for pause. We're called to have a moment for waiting. And that can be uncomfortable. It can be very uncomfortable in those times where we don't know where the heck we're going. We walk by faith. We don't walk by sight. And that can be hard. But I promise you, I can wholeheartedly promise you, when we give up our own will, when we let God direct us, we might not get the things we want, but we'll get the things we need, and we'll get to where we're supposed to be, not where we want to be. And so in all, I pray that you may give God the opportunity to be your freedom by surrendering your will and instead doing God's will. I can promise that in the process you will find peace, you will find joy, and you will find fulfillment. So in my final question, I ask, what do you need to surrender to Jesus? And what does it mean to live a life surrendering to Christ? line that we talked about in our tables and everything like that. So, like Disney movies, we hear a lot of times by society to follow your heart and chase your desires. But how many times do we feel stuck or longing for a little more or not feeling fully fulfilled after those things? Like seriously, like think of times where like maybe you bought a new vehicle or like you finally hit a milestone maybe in your life and you're like, this is it. This is where we're finally gonna figure something out. And this is the key word here is I. I'm figuring something out. I'm finding my way and everything. There's no surrenderance or obedience. And sometimes with the burdens that we carry, it's common for us to look into the creation for something that may break these chains or lighten the load. I remember when I reached a point in my life where I was searching for something to liberate me from the things that I was carrying, struggles, anxiety, and just wanting something a little more in my life, feeling like there's something missing, almost like a hole in my heart. And for me, this was my desire was when I was seeking was with this fulfillment was with sports. And I started doing sports when I was probably in like first grade, and I did a lot of different sports. I remember I did track, I did wrestling, I've done football, I've done soccer. I tried out basketball, and then I followed out my first game, and I realized that was probably not the best sport for me. Um, and so I didn't take athletics super seriously probably until I hit high school. And then I wasn't the most talented or the most gifted person, but the one thing I did have was a hard work ethic. So during COVID, I remember the whole summer I had an internship in Kakana at an electrical company. I would work there for 8 hours, and then I would lift for 2 hours, and then Mondays and Wednesdays I would run for another hour. And I just kept working and working and working and trying to improve my physical capabilities in sports. And then finally, my senior year, I was finally harvesting all that time and all those things that I missed in order to get to the point where I was at. I remember in football, I was all conference defense and offense, and I was all region defense and offense. And in wrestling, I had a pretty good career already. I was Brilliant's first four-time conference champ, and at the peak of my season after the Freedom Invite, where there was a person who was from Appleton North. He was committed to a D1 football team. I want to say it was North Dakota State. And then there was the state champ from the year prior, and I won that tournament. And after that tournament, I looked at the rankings, as we all do Mondays before practice. I was ranked number 1 in our division, and then I was ranked number 2 in our state at the 195-pound weight class. And yet, there was something still missing. A lot of times people will say, it gets lonely at the top. It gets lonely when you're finally, doing all the things you can. And so I keep going with my season, and I make it to state, pretty highly ranked. And I remember the night before competition, I got the worst stomach bug I ever got in my life. Like I've probably never been that sick before in my life, and I've had staph before, and I've had other things, that has brought me down. I lost 11 pounds overnight, and it was rough. I was actually able to make the weight class below, and that was a 13-pound weight difference. And I remember I got done with my first match, and I just got throttled. I've never gotten beat like that in years, and I was just like left wondering like why? Like why? Like I put all this time and effort in, and I was doing something that I thought was glorifying God, but I was ending up glorifying myself. And so I went down a dead end. I went down a place in my life where I thought I was doing something for God, but I lost it. I lost my purpose with it. And that changed when I went to college. I started a Bible study group on the wrestling team, and we started incorporating prayers, but in that moment in my life, my senior year of high school, I was going down, I was chasing my desires. I was chasing after the accolades. I was chasing after, it feels pretty good to win a little bit. It feels pretty good to win a little bit in life. But that's not what God wanted me to do. And I look back now and I thank God for humbling me and redirecting me in another way. And so the question I would like you guys to discuss for the next 5 minutes is, what has led your heart astray? What desire have you chased down? What rabbit hole have you gone down that ended up being a dead end? That can be many different things, and I want you guys to discuss that for a little bit.